Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Pond Pro podcast. I have Chris on with me today. Hello.
Hello, Tally.
Let's get started. Just tell us who you are, where you're from, how many stores you got.
My name is Chris Shumaker from Davenport, Iowa. Currently have 2 stores. Two stores is the most I've ever had, but this is my second time having multiple locations. So it took us a while to get it staffed up and not losing money. But that's where we're at now. 2 stores, one that's making money and one that's not losing it.
Cool. Let's circle back to that. First question is always, how'd you get into the industry?
The long answer for it would be through my grandma. Grandma was always a thrift shopper, a garage sailor. Grandma got all of her kids into it. And so when my mom married my stepdad, he was a big pawn shopper and garage sailor. And when I was 14 years old, they bought a pawn shop. So that became my, after school, nights and weekends kind of thing.
Yeah.
When I was 14. And, kind of been doing it ever since.
You're the second one in a row that's grandma got them into pawn via garage sailing. So that's super cool. Shout out to the grandmas for bringing their grandkids to garage sales. That's cool. So you started by saying you're fully staffed, you've got 2 stores. That takes a long time. Tell us how you went about that and hiring and what that process was like.
For me, the hiring process was, painful, long, excruciating. Hired and fired a number of people. One person I had to press theft charges on. 70-hour work weeks when we were, when we weren't staffed up, and working the 10-hour days, 7 days a week. Like we all probably have, any of us that have been in this business for, running our own stores for any period of time. So, it was kind of a kick in the teeth being 30 years in the industry and being back to square one of 7 days a week. Not being able to take time off, but at the same time, it's nice to, sit down and get a grasp on everything that happens all day, every day. And then, sleep some other time. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise. We kind of got ourselves, back in order and got things so that when we did bring in new staff, our processes were clean. Our day-to-day operations were functioning at a pretty high level. And our customer service levels got to stay, where we needed them. So, at the end of the day, it was long. It was, like I say, it was a lot of hours. But, I also had my store manager with me that I, absolutely could not have done it without her.
Yeah.
And, then just piecing it together with everybody else that we had coming in and out. And now we're finally in a good place. We've got the right people in place. Some people with experience, some people without experience. So we're kind of all retraining ourselves together and finding our way into it. So.
That's great. I used to ask my dad all the time, like, what was the hardest jump of store count? Was it like 10 to 20? Was it like, where was like the hardest? And he always said from 1 to 2, because it's not double the amount of work, it's triple the amount of work or more. And you just don't think, you think like, oh, 2 stores, I'm going to be able to like find synergy. And he's like, you're just required to be in 2 places for the same amount of time that you used to be in, have to be in 1 place. So you're just working twice as hard. And usually the second store doesn't do as well as the first store does. So
true. I actually took it a step further about 10 years ago. I owned some retail cell phone locations. And so I had 2 retail cellular stores along with 2 pawn shops. And so at the time, then I was running 4 stores, 9 employees. Yeah. And my stores were an hour and a half to 2 hours apart, depending on where, which one I was coming from and going to. And that just imploded horribly to the point, some of that debt I was still paying off, pretty recently. So,
yeah.
But again, it was the same thing there. It was, 7 days a week, 10-hour days, driving back and forth, 75, 80 miles one way. and still make it home for dinner. So, this second time jumping from one store to two has been, it's been a hard transition, but I learned a lot from the lessons of the mistakes that I made before. So,
what motivated you this time around to go from one to two?
Mainly just where I'm at in my career. I hesitate to use the word boredom, but I'm somebody that, the repetition can only, I can only do it so many millions of times in a row before it's just, okay, it's time for something new.
Yeah.
And I also happen to live in the same area that I grew up in, and I know most of the pawnbrokers in this area. And, there were a lot of those old school pawnbrokers that, had a hard time adapting and had a hard time changing. And they were stuck in their ways because this is how we've always done it.
Yeah.
And I kind of, my initial plan was to get us all, because just like everybody else, we had, your corporate pawn shops come in and try to put all us little guys out of business. And I actually worked for one of the corporate stores for a couple years, earlier in my career. So I kind of have an idea of, how they function and how they operate. So when I got back here and bought my first store, I came in and said, let's band together. Walmart is here to put us out of business. Let's start a team and let's do this all together. And all of the older pawnbrokers pretty much said no.
Yeah.
And I, my vision, then I had to alter my vision of, one big Davenport team to, okay, well, if nobody wants to be on the team, then the team is still going to move forward one way or the other.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of where it came from. I started to, I had a vision about 7 years ago of how I wanted to execute these things and how I wanted to put things in play. And, it involved collecting partners along the way. And long story short, I'm left without partners right now, but the vision still keeps moving forward. So, yeah, that was kind of the impetus behind it was just, adapt or die. And I refuse to die.
What is your vision moving forward? Partners, or like culturally, or what your pawn shops would look like, or what does that look like for you?
I'm very adaptable. I don't have all I have is an end goal, and even that end goal is still pretty malleable. It's not here's the cut and dry black and white of what my business is going to look like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Like I say, the initial vision involved me taking on 2 other pawn shops as partners. I did end up partnering with one of them, and things just didn't work out. We went our separate ways after a little while. And then the second store that I took on, I initially took on with the previous owner as my partner. And it just, a year later, he decided he didn't want to be a part of it anymore. So, okay, the vision changes now. Now it's back to it's back to being my show, and it's back to being, what can me and my team build, and how big, how quick, how efficiently can we get to whatever the next level of it is. And then, once I get to that place, then I can start looking at, okay, what's next? Yeah. Is it another store? Is it another, different area? Like I say, I don't lock myself into one vision. My mentality is very much adapt or die. So, when, just like right now, gold's way up, we're adapting to the price of gold being way up. Well, I started 30 years ago when gold was 10% of what it is right now. So
totally.
I've seen the industry adapt, and I know that I need to do the same. So
you mentioned before staffing your store and maybe a lot of lessons along the way. I think that staffing stores is usually one of the hardest. When I ask people what their greatest challenge is, staffing is right up there. So maybe you can share, like, if you were to go back and start fresh, like you didn't just have all these, like, what would you do differently, or what are your takeaways moving forward on maybe hiring or retaining or anything staffing related?
Well, retention is huge. As I said before, I was lucky. I did retain my one store manager that's been with me for four years now. I retained her throughout the whole process. If I would have lost her, on a, who knows where I would be right now. I promise you I would not have 2 stores if it weren't for her. So retention is huge. When you find the right person that fits the culture and fits, has the same vision and modes of accomplishing the vision. Retention is huge, super important. What I can also say is that some of the mistakes that I made during the hiring was not staying firm enough with some of my non-negotiables, and kind of, getting so frustrated throughout the process of saying, okay, maybe I can make this person work. And every single occasion where I did that, failed miserably.
Yep.
I had people that I had one woman that lasted 1 shift. I had people that lasted 3 days. The longest one that I had lasted about a month and a half before I caught him stealing. Stick to your guns. If you've been in this business for a long time and you're pretty firm on what your non-negotiables are as far as staffing is concerned, don't trust your instincts, trust your gut with that. Yes, do not deviate. Absolutely.
So you mentioned that your, I guess, vision is adapt or die. What would you say your leadership or management style is for your stores?
I will say that I didn't. It's funny because I'm actually doing some leadership training right now with a fairly prominent leadership coach in the pawn industry, and one of the things that I've taken from that is that I never had leadership training. It was one of those things. I have a buddy of mine that wrote a book about this exact subject, and one of the things that he says in his book is, most people that get placed into a leadership position have no leadership or management training in any way, shape, or form. They're just good at their job, therefore they should be able to teach other people how to be good at their job. Yeah. And that's just bad logic. Yeah. So my management style, if you ask some of my former employees, I'm sure they would say not very good things about it. There were times where I was, in hindsight, I can look back now and say I made some pretty serious mistakes and some pretty strong misjudgments. And, ego gets in the way when you're a little bit younger than I am now. So my previous leadership and management styles were lackluster, to say the least. I'm in a place right now where I'm kind of trying to retrain myself as far as that's concerned, because I'm trying to get myself away from being just a pawnbroker. I can do that part of the job, but if I expect my company to grow, somebody has to be the leader. Yeah. And, that's leader is one of the main parts of leadership. Yeah. So, you can only be a good leader if people are willing to follow you. So that's what I'm working on for myself right now. So my leadership style right now is to be as inclusive and open as I can be, and as is relevant and appropriate, but just letting everybody know, like, these are your expectations. Here are the expectations on myself. I put in a new training this morning. We're implementing a new in-store training process, and I told all of my staff, we're all doing this. I've been a pawnbroker for 30 years. I'm doing it. My store manager's been in it for 12 or 13 years. She's doing it. The girl that's been doing this for 4 months now, she's also doing it. Yeah. So, lead by example as much as possible, and, like I say, be as open and as transparent as I can be, and be as honest with myself and everybody else around me as I can be. Are you working with Yigal? I am.
Shout out to Yigal. He does amazing leadership work, and
it's funny because anybody that's ever worked with Yigal can probably hear what I'm saying right now, and they can hear his training coming out of me.
Yeah, how did you kind of, I guess, one day look in the mirror and say, you know what, I think I need leadership training?
That's a good question. I guess for me, it all came with the package of what I wanted the company to be, and realizing that somebody needed to fall into that. And I've been in a place for 6 months or a year now, probably longer than that actually, probably more like 18 months now, where, I'm trying to find a different place within the industry. It's not just being a pawnbroker, not just being behind the counter, not just, being in the store and dealing with customers, not just all of that stuff. I've done that stuff for 30 years. And about 18 months ago, I started looking around and trying to find a different place within the industry. And what I realized was, my mindset was a little bit too small for that. I hadn't really expanded it. And so, I kind of opened myself up to just looking around and finding, being open to what's available. And Yugal was somebody who, not to make this a Yugal billboard, but Yugal was somebody who I heard him speak at the convention at Expo, probably, I don't know, second or third time I went to the convention 10 years ago or something like that. And his just, he motivated me 10 years ago in a way that stuck with me for 10 years. And then, as I kept going on through the process, his name just kept coming up. And, he offered some free seminars that I got involved with. And then, his leadership training that I'm doing right now, it literally just made itself available to me. And I was open to it. And I was receptive to it. And that was really all it took. It was just, I was in the right place, mentally, physically, and, knowing that I need to grow.
Yeah.
And it just made sense. So
I think that's such a hack that people don't either recognize or realize that there's like support there. I'm in a bunch of organizations, and I went back to school to Harvard for this program. It's like a post an executive MBA. And I remember one of the professors basically was like, how many of you guys have a CEO coach? And 90% of the classroom raised their hand, and I didn't even really know what that was. And I was like, all these people have a CEO coach? Nobody told me that I should have that. And I've been a CEO for 8 years of a growing company, kind of learning trial by failure. And there's a way that I can do this better. And so I got home from school and I hired a CEO coach, and I've been working with him for 2 years. And it's really amazing. And it's just a little extra inspiration. And we do a lot of leadership stuff. And to your point, leadership isn't it's not lead by example necessarily. It's a skill set that you have to expand. And I tell some of my direct reports this is just because you're showing you're leading by example, people don't necessarily, they can't snap to that unless you're training them that you're leading by example. It's not necessarily so intuitive. You don't just become a leader because maybe you were under somebody that was a good leader. You actually have to be trained to be a leader. And that's another I didn't know that. I just kind of thought guess, if you have a good leader, you'll be a good leader. But it's not true.
I guess it goes back to an old manager that I had. His name was Steve Bullard when I was living in Denver. And Steve Bullard was one of the first people that actually sat down and broke down with me. He gave me some of the most honest criticism for my career that I've ever received, and he was one of the first people that did it in any way that I could hear it. Yeah. And he sat down, and what he actually he didn't. I wouldn't say he taught me more than anything else or anybody else that I've ever met in my life, but what he taught me was what I already knew. And how to implement a lot of the pieces of this and pieces of that. Let's put this, move that one over there, and it was the first time in my head where the puzzle kind of clicked into place, and I was like, man, I've been doing this at the time. I think I was 15 years in or something like that, and I was like, man, I've been doing this for 15 years already. Why did I never think of things that way? And moving forward with that, like I say, my leadership style for a long time was not great. As I said, as a lot of my former employees will attest. But what I will say now is that it's not just a lead by example situation. What I found lately is that it's more about lead by what's necessary.
Yeah.
I have a very Darwinist outlook on life. The strong survive, et cetera, et cetera. And what's necessary for my company to, I want to be the lion, not the doe.
Yeah.
So what's necessary for that to happen? And then just make and do with what I can get, what I can accomplish, what I can get done in a day, what I can get done in a week, what I can get done in a month. That's. I mean, I hate to be in a position where I feel like I'm giving advice, because I still feel like I have so much to learn on this side of things. It's like what you said. You get into this classroom, and 90% of them, they've got this coach, they've got this trainer, they've got this experience, and then there's the 10% of us sitting here. Like, as you just said, that I would love to have a CEO coach. Maybe someday I'll, that'll be an expense that meets the top of my list, and I can start spending that money. But yeah. For now, I rely a lot on, like you say, a buddy of mine, Zanzibar Vermilio, just wrote a book on management that has been very helpful. Yigal's training has been very helpful. In my free time, some of the stuff that I read, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho was one of those books, life-altering kind of a thing. Siddhartha by Herman Hesse, stuff like that. So, just a lot of stuff like that I put together, and hopefully is informing me and teaching me to be not just a better leader, but just a better human being. Yeah. Just better to the people around me, better to, anybody that works with me or just deals with me on a daily basis. So. You
said that 10-ish or so years ago was your first NPA, and this year you are heading back to speak. Congratulations. What are you going to be speaking about?
A lot of what I've been speaking about today, adapting to changes in the industry. One of my big mottos in the business for the last 15 years has been adapt or die. And, there's a lot of technological changes that have happened in the last 5 years, let alone the last 15, let alone the last 30. Yeah. There have been, like what we talked about earlier with the hiring. Hiring has changed. The mindset of, the potential coworker has changed. Yeah. Ways of building your community, which is, I think an essential part of what we do. How do you build a community has changed. What is that community that you're building? Yeah. Everything has changed. Yeah. And they just adapting. That's going to be the majority of my talk.
That's great. And maybe this is the same exact thing, but if you were giving advice, let's say giving advice to somebody that's thinking about going from one store to two, because you've done it twice, what would be the advice that you would give to somebody doing that? There's no way that you can plan ahead for everything that's coming. Yeah. There's 0% chance that you're going to be 100% successful for it. I've done it before, and I still came up blank. So be as prepared as you can possibly be, but start with the small things that you can control. Your daily processes. I only have 3 things that I care about in my business: customer service, process, and efficiency. If you can master those 3 things, take care of your customers right away, get your processes in place, and do everything as efficiently as you can possibly do it. Be efficient with your time, be efficient with your energy, be efficient with your money. And if you can master those 3 things, that kind of opens the door to just about anything else, in my opinion. So that's what's prepared me for, for getting from one store to 2. And now that like I said, we're not successful, we're not making money yet, but it's not costing me anything anymore. So that's how I've gotten from point A to what is now point B, and hopefully working to point C, D, E. So. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I will see you in Atlanta in July.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Thanks for having me, Tally. You do the same.